That Thursday morning started like any other. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window, the kind of soft drizzle that Seattle is famous for. My husband Thomas had already left for work. His coffee mug was still warm on the counter, a faint trace of his cologne hanging in the air. After 40 years together, our mornings had become routine, predictable, quiet, safe. Or at least that was what I believed. I was retired now with time on my hands, and I thought a surprise visit might brighten his day. Thomas had been distant lately, late nights at the office, vague phone calls, excuses that never quite matched. Still, I told myself he was just tired, overworked, maybe even planning something nice for our upcoming anniversary. Hope can be such a stubborn thing. I stopped by a small bakery downtown and bought his favorite chocolates, the dark ones with sea salt. I asked the clerk to wrap them in silver paper with a red ribbon. It looked perfect, simple, thoughtful, like our marriage used to feel. As I drove toward his office, the city skyline shimmered through the drizzle, and for a moment, I felt young again, like the woman who used to bring him lunch when he was just an accountant dreaming big. When I arrived at the building, I smiled at the security guard and said, "Good morning. I'm here to see my husband, Thomas Dalton." The man looked at me puzzled. Then he said words that froze me in place. "Oh, Mrs. Dalton already left. She comes by almost every day." I blinked, confused, my hand tightening around the box of chocolates. "I'm Mrs. Dalton," I said softly. Before he could respond, the elevator doors opened. A woman stepped out tall, polished, maybe mid-40s, wearing a navy suit and confidence-like perfume. The guard nodded to her. "See you tomorrow, Mrs. Dalton." My breath caught. She glanced at me briefly, polite but distant, as if I were invisible. In that single moment, the ground shifted beneath my feet. 40 years of marriage, memories, and promises, all undone by one stranger's name. I stood there, the rain blurring the glass behind me, and realized my surprise visit had turned into something else entirely. I don't remember walking to the elevator. My legs moved on their own, driven by a cold kind of focus. The guard's voice faded behind me as I pressed the button to the top floor where Thomas's office was. My reflection in the elevator doors looked foreign, an older woman, with perfect posture, clutching a box of chocolates that suddenly felt like a cruel joke. When the doors opened, I stepped into the quiet hallway of the executive floor. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I made my way toward the door marked Thomas Dalton, Chief Financial Officer. Through the frosted glass, I could see his silhouette moving. For a second, I thought about leaving, pretending I had never come, but curiosity and betrayal make a dangerous combination. I turned the handle. Thomas looked up, startled. "Renee," his eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost. Papers slipped from his hand. "What are you doing here?" I placed the box on his desk. "I came to surprise you," I said. "But it seems I'm the one who got surprised." He opened his mouth to speak, but another voice interrupted a man's voice from the doorway. "Thomas, here's the contract for lunch with Claire." The name hit me like glass shattering. Claire, the woman from the lobby. The man froze when he saw me, mumbling something before slipping out. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. "Renee, please sit down." "I'd rather stand," I replied. My voice was calm, steady in a way that frightened even me. "Who is Claire?" "Dalton. He hesitated, then sighed like a man who had been carrying a heavy secret for too long. "She's someone I met a long time ago. 15 years, maybe more. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did." I felt my throat tighten. "You've been seeing her for 15 years. He nodded, eyes down. "It started as a mistake when I kept telling myself I would end, but then she had a daughter. Her name is Lily." For a moment the room spun. My hands trembled, but I held my ground. "You have a child with her." Thomas's silence was enough of an answer. I turned toward the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The city below looked small and distant, like someone else's life. 15 years, I whispered while I planned dinners, birthdays, anniversaries. You were building another family. He stepped closer, desperate. Renee, please. I never stopped loving you. I turned to face him, eyes burning. You just loved someone else too. He reached out, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. My voice broke on the edge of anger and disbelief. Every late night, every business trip, I believed you. I defended you. Tears welled up, hot and humiliating. Do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't want to hurt you, he said. I almost laughed. You didn't want to hurt me, Thomas. You just wanted both worlds. I picked up the box of chocolates, tore off the ribbon, and let them scatter across his desk. Here's your surprise, I said, my voice shaking but firm. You can share them with your other wife. And before he could say another word, I walked out, leaving the sound of chocolates rolling across the floor behind me. By the time I reached the car, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The drizzle had turned to steady rain, streaking the windshield in gray ribbons. I didn't drive home right away. I sat there motionless, watching people hurry by with umbrellas, living their small, ordinary lives, while mine had just split in two. When I finally reached the house, everything looked different. The furniture, the family photos, the wedding picture on the hallway wall, it all felt staged, like props from a play that had already ended. I walked into our bedroom and opened Thomas's closet. His shirts were lined up perfectly, arranged by color, pressed and clean. My hand brushed over the fabric, steady at first, then trembling harder with every touch. Something inside me snapped. I began pulling everything off the hangers, jackets, ties, suits. The sound of hangers snapping filled the room like cracking bones. Drawers slammed open, socks, papers, and cufflinks scattering across the floor. Then I noticed a small wooden box tucked beneath a stack of old sweaters. It had a tiny brass lock, delicate but firm. I found a letter opener on the nightstand and forced it open. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Thomas at a beach with that woman, Claire. Thomas holding a little girl with bright eyes and a familiar smile. Thomas celebrating birthdays, holidays, a second life I knew nothing about. There were bank statements, too, a lease agreement for an apartment across the city, even drawings from the child signed Lily. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor. 40 years of trust had dissolved into paper and ink. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at those pictures spread across the carpet like a timeline of deceit. The front door opened. His voice echoed down the hallway. "Renee, are you home?" When he stepped into the room, his face drained of color. "Renee, please let me explain." I rose slowly, holding one of the photos between my fingers. "This," I said quietly, "is your real life, isn't it?" He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "You built an entire world behind my back. While I was here raising our children, keeping this house, waiting for you, night after night, you were somewhere else, loving someone else. Renee, please." "No." My voice was hoarse but firm. "There's nothing left to say. Pack your things and get out." He hesitated, looking helpless, but something in my face must have told him there was no room left for negotiation. Within minutes, he gathered a few clothes and left. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in 40 years, I was truly alone, and somehow that silence felt honest. The next morning, the world felt unnaturally still. The rain had stopped, leaving a thin layer of fog over the yard. I stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee, the same mug Thomas used every morning. I placed it in the sink and turned away. Some habits didn't deserve to survive. By noon, I had called a locksmith to change every lock in the house. Watching him replace the metal bolts one by one felt symbolic. Each click, a small piece of my control returning. When he left, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by silence. I didn't cry. I just breathed deeply, intentionally, as if learning how to again. That afternoon, I called Marlene, an old friend who had once been a lawyer before retiring. "Marlene," I said quietly, I need help filing for divorce. She didn't ask why. Her voice was steady, compassionate. Come by tomorrow. Well, get everything started. Next came the hardest calls, our children. I dialed Evan first, then Laura. They both came over that evening, confused and worried. When I opened the door, their faces, my grown children, now parents themselves, looked like echoes of the past. Evan spoke first. "Mom, what's going on? Dad isn't answering his phone." We sat in the living room where they had once played with toy cars and dolls. I told them the truth, not all the details, but enough. Thomas had been living a second life, another woman, a daughter, 15 years of lies. The words hung in the air like smoke. Laura started to cry. Evan stood up and began pacing the room, his jaw clenched. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "After everything, after all these years." "I know," I said softly. "Neither can I." Laura reached for my hand. "What are you going to do, Mom?" "I already started," I said. "I'm divorcing him. I'm done pretending we're still the family we used to be." Evan stopped pacing. "Do you need help with anything? Money? Paperwork? Whatever it takes." I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. I just need peace." They stayed until late, refusing to leave until they were sure I was okay. After they went home, I cleaned up the empty teacups and turned off the lights. The house felt different now. Emptier, yes, but also lighter. There was no more waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. No more pretending not to notice the late hours. Just me and they hum of quiet honesty. As I crawled into bed, exhaustion finally caught up with me. But beneath the ache and the loneliness, there was something else. Something small but unmistakable. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was the first flicker of relief. For 40 years I had been Mrs. Dalton. That night, as the rain began to fall again outside my window, I whispered to myself, "I'm just Renee now." And for the first time, that sounded like enough. A week passed before the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and heartbreakingly familiar. "Mrs. Dalton," she asked, "this is Claire Monroe. I think we need to talk." For a moment I couldn't breathe. I should have hung up. I should have said there was nothing left to discuss. But curiosity has its own gravity, and I was too tired to resist. "Why?" I asked flatly. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" "I'm not calling to argue," she replied. "I just think we should be honest with each other. If you're willing, can we meet somewhere public?" Against every rational thought, I agreed. We met the next afternoon at a quiet cafe overlooking the water. I arrived early, sitting by the window, watching seagulls skim the surface of the bay. When she walked in, I recognized her instantly, the same woman from the office. She was younger, yes, but not by much. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture straight, yet there was something weary in her eyes. "Renee," she said softly as she sat down, "thank you for meeting me." "I'm not sure why I did," I replied. "So let's not waste time. What do you want?" Claire folded her hands, searching for words. "I didn't come to defend him. I came to tell you that I know this isn't your fault, and I'm sorry." The word sorry hung between us, fragile and insufficient. I looked at her carefully. "Did you know about me?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yes, from the beginning. Thomas told me he was married. He said things were complicated, that you two had grown apart. I believed him because I wanted to." Her honesty surprised me more than her admission. "And when you had his child?" I asked. "I told him to stay with you," she said. "I didn't want to destroy a family, but things got tangled over the years. He started visiting more often. Lily grew up knowing her father as someone who appeared in flashes, birthdays, holidays, stolen weekends." I exhaled slowly. "You built a life on the same lie he told both of us." She nodded, eyes downcast. "You're right, I did, and I hate what it's done to all of us." For the first time, I saw not a rival, but another woman trapped in the same web. We had both been lied to, manipulated by a man who wanted to be loved without consequences. After a long silence, I said quietly, "You were lied to." "So was I. We just believed in the same liar." She looked up, her eyes shimmering. "I hope someday you find peace." "I will," I said, standing. "But not because of him, because I finally stopped waiting for the truth." When I left the cafe, the air outside felt different, cleaner somehow. For the first time since everything began, I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Divorce papers moved through the system slowly, but I no longer checked the mailbox with dread. Every delay, every signature felt less like punishment and more like a cleansing. I was learning to live without the constant noise of someone else's presence. The silence no longer frightened me. It started to feel like company. I filled my days with small things at first: morning walks through Volunteer Park, fresh flowers on the kitchen table. I started cooking meals just for myself, real ones, not the hurried dinners I used to make when Thomas called to say he'd be late. In the evenings, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and a book one never had time to read. The loneliness softened into something gentler: solitude. One afternoon, I found an old box of art supplies from my teaching years: brushes, dried paints, and a half-finished canvas. I set it on the dining table and began to paint again. At first, my hands were unsure, but as color spread across the paper, I felt something stir inside me, something that had been buried under decades of compromise. When I finished, it wasn't a masterpiece, but it was mine. Soon, I joined a local art class. Everyone there was older, like me, people trying to fill the blank spaces left behind by time. We laughed, shared stories, and painted sunsets that looked nothing like the real thing. But it didn't matter. We were creating, and that was enough. Then came photography. I bought a used camera at a thrift shop, a little scratched, but still good. I spent weekends wandering around Pike Place Market, capturing moments, vendors arranging flowers, children chasing pigeons, couples holding hands under umbrellas. Through the lens, I began to see beauty again, even in the rain. One evening, Laura called. "Mom, you sound different," she said. I smiled. "Maybe I am." When I hung up, I stood on the balcony, the city lights glimmering below. For years, I had lived in someone else's story, waiting for permission to feel whole. But now, I was learning something simple and profound. It's strange, I thought, how losing everything can make you find yourself. The night air was cool, the sky clearing after days of drizzle. I whispered into the wind, "I'm still here." And for the first time in a long while, that felt like a promise instead of a plea. Spring arrived slowly in Seattle, soft and hesitant, like it was afraid to be too hopeful. By then, the divorce was finalized. I signed the last set of documents in Marlene's office, thanked her, and walked outside into the sunlight. The air smelled faintly of rain and cherry blossoms. For a moment, I simply stood there, eyes closed, feeling the warmth on my face. I was free legally, emotionally, finally. A few weeks later, I went to an art exhibit downtown. My photography instructor had encouraged me to submit one of my pictures, a black and white shot of an elderly woman selling flowers. I didn't expect it to be chosen, but it was. The gallery wasn't large, just a cozy space filled with light and quiet conversation. As I walked along the displays, I heard a gentle male voice behind me. "That's a beautiful composition," he said. "You captured more than her face. You caught her spirit." I turned around and met Robert Hayes. He was in his mid-60s, tall with kind eyes and a beard that made him look like he had read every book ever written. We started talking about art, history, travel, the small joys that make life worthwhile. He told me he was a retired history professor who had taken up photography after losing his wife 5 years ago. I told him I was learning to start over. He smiled and said, "Then we're both students again." What began as friendly conversation turned into shared coffee breaks after class, long walks through the sculpture park, and evenings spent talking about everything from Greek philosophers to bad movies. There was no rush, no pretense. With Robert, I didn't have to prove anything. I could just be Renee. One evening after a concert at the symphony, he kissed me for the first time. It wasn't passionate or dramatic, just gentle, certain, kind. And in that quiet moment, I realized something beautiful. Love doesn't have to be loud to be real. Months passed. My children met him and, to my relief, liked him immediately. Evan teased me about finally dating an artist, and Laura said, "He looks at you the way Dad used to before everything." That comment didn't sting. It felt like closure. When Thomas suffered a minor heart attack later that year, I visited him at the hospital. He looked older, smaller, and somehow lost. He whispered, "You were right to move on, Renee." I nodded. There was nothing left to forgive, only to accept. As I walked out of that sterile hallway, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The woman who once walked into an office holding chocolates had walked out of another, this time carrying peace. A year after everything unraveled, I stood on my balcony overlooking Elliott Bay. The sun was setting, turning the water into gold. A suitcase sat by the door. My first real trip, alone. I was flying to Europe in the morning, a journey I had dreamed about for decades, but never taken. Back then, there had always been an excuse: work, family, responsibility. Now there were no excuses left, only freedom. Robert would join me 2 weeks later in Paris. He insisted I go ahead, said every story deserved a solo beginning before the next chapter began. I laughed when he said that, but deep down I understood. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a declaration. My life wasn't something that happened to me anymore. I was choosing it day by day. I walked back inside, poured a glass of wine, and glanced at a framed photograph on my wall. The one I'd taken of the flower seller, the one that started everything. Next to it hung another picture. Me standing beside Robert at the exhibit, smiling like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for her happiness. As twilight settled over the city, I sat down to write in my journal something I hadn't done since my teaching days. The first line came easily. I thought my story ended the day I found out about his other wife, but that was just the beginning of mine. The words felt simple, but they carried all the weight of the year behind them. The pain, the courage, the rediscovery. I closed the notebook and looked out at the fading light, whispering to myself, I made it. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not pretending the hurt never happened, but living fully in spite of it. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, know this. You're not alone. Start small. Breathe. Keep moving. The pain doesn't define you what you do after it does. And if my story touched you, share yours. Like this video. Leave a comment below. And remember, it's never too late to start over.